The Second World War saw scientific and technological advancements proceed at an almost unprecedented pace. Those advancements paired themselves with a willingness to win by any means necessary and to destroy the enemy. What was born from this destructively fertile ground was an atomic industry harnessed and directed by the military to create a new weapon of mass destruction, a nuclear bomb. These are weapons so powerful and capable of such indiscriminate destruction that they've only been used in a hostile manner twice by the same nation, it might be added, despite being possessed by a number of nations. I'm your host, David, and today we'll be talking about the advent of nuclear weapons programs in the Second World War and the early Cold War period. I'm also going to outline one of the guiding theories of nuclear weapons use during this entire period, the nightmare-inducing mutually assured destruction. This is the Cold War. So, to start, we should probably go over a quick history of the development of the atomic bomb. For once, our story isn't going to start during World War II, but rather just before, with the discovery in 1938 in Germany of a process called nuclear fission. This is a process where atoms of radioactive material are split, causing a powerful release of energy. This knowledge and research, as I'm sure you would expect, was quickly taken over by various militaries to see if it could be harnessed into a usable weapon. In the United States, a 1939 letter written to President Roosevelt by physicist Leo Szilard and signed by Albert Einstein, Edward Teller, and Eugene Wigner warned of the possibility of Nazi Germany developing atomic weapons and urged the United States to develop its own atomic program, while at the same time stockpiling as much uranium ore as possible. In October of 1941, Roosevelt approved the Army to begin an atomic research program. Just over a year later, in December of 1942, one of the most famous science experiments of all time was established, the Manhattan Project, bringing together scientists and the military to build an atomic weapon. The United Kingdom was also invited to participate in the Manhattan Project. However, they already had their own independent research project underway, codenamed Alloy Tubes, and Churchill declined the offer of cooperation. American offers of financial cooperation were also refused, as the British felt their own program was further ahead than the Americans, and the British did not want to lose control of the technology. However, due to financial stress from the war, the British had a difficult time providing adequate funding, leading Churchill to eventually agree to cooperate with Roosevelt, albeit informally. By 1943, however, British cooperation had all but ceased, with the British no longer sending scientists or even their research to the United States. In response, the US stopped sharing any of their information. Collaboration only resumed after the August 1943 Quebec Agreement, at the urging of the scientists involved in the projects themselves. This sort of reminds me of my kids fighting over a toy until I need to step in and break up the fight. Only, in this case, the politicians are the kids, and the scientists are the adults. Not much of a stretch, really. Anyways, back to the Manhattan Project. By June of 1944, 130,000 people were dedicated to the program. In a time of total war, this was a major undertaking, assigning so many skilled workers and scientists to one specific project. The project itself, under the direction of the theoretical physicist Robert Oppenheimer, and primarily located in Los Alamos, New Mexico, was cloaked in secrecy. The vast majority of the people involved in the project actually had no idea what they were even working on. Any mention of the project's purpose was punishable with a severe fine or a 10-year jail term. The German nuclear program, for its part, had suffered delays and setbacks, in part the result of Allied attacks on research facilities, including the SOE-sponsored Operation Gunnerside, which destroyed the heavy water facilities in Telemark, Norway. If you don't know the story, go find out about it. It's absolutely fascinating. But anyway, after the Allied landings in Normandy and the liberation of northern France, a team of scientists was dispatched to accompany the advance and gain information about the status of the German nuclear program, while at the same time denying any found information to the Soviet Union. The Allied conclusion from this information gathering was that the German program lacked sufficient resources to produce an atomic weapon in the near future, leaving the United States well ahead of any other country in its progress towards the nuclear age. On July 16, 1945, the Trinity test was conducted at the Alamogordo bombing range in New Mexico, and the successful completion of the test brought the world into a new age. A few weeks later, on August 6th, the United States stepped further into the history books, detonating Little Boy, a uranium-based weapon over the Japanese city of Hiroshima, becoming the only nation to use a nuclear weapon in anger. 3 days later, it doubled down on this record, detonating Fat Man, a plutonium-based bomb over the city of Nagasaki. These two raids killed over 100,000 people outright, the result of the blast effects, the heat, and the subsequent radiation. Although the Americans were prepared to conduct further nuclear strikes, the Japanese surrender on August 15th prevented further nuclear use.
Idaho homeowners, if you have a power meter like this on the side of your house, you can qualify to get free solar.
So that's the Allied nuclear project. But what were the Soviets doing? Well, they weren't ignoring nuclear technology during the war years. The Soviet program had a different trajectory than that of the Western Allies. The struggle against Nazi Germany was the clear priority after 1941, and it absorbed the vast majority of Soviet resources. This meant that very little human capital and material resources were available for theoretical projects. This changed, however, in April of 1942, when the Soviet physicist Georgy Flyarov wrote directly to Stalin to point out that Western scientific publications surrounding the topic of fission had all but stopped after 1939. Flyarov surmised, correctly as we already know, that secret projects were underway to weaponize the technology. The letters to Stalin and Molotov urged Soviet leadership not to ignore this new field of research, and went so far as to encourage the development of a uranium bomb as soon as possible. Stalin, as we've pointed out previously, was always a pragmatist, and recognizing the importance that such technology would bring to whoever possessed it, immediately initiated a bomb project of his own. He appointed the physicists Anatoly Alexandrov and Igor Kurchatov to head the project. Of course, guidance from senior leadership was still required, and initially this role fell to Molotov. However, the project was eventually transferred to the responsibility of the Soviet Army, but with major support from Lavrenti Beria, the head of the NKVD. Clearly, everybody wanted a piece of what they all knew would be a crown jewel of Soviet power and authority. One of the largest challenges faced by the Soviet nuclear program was sourcing a sufficient amount of uranium. The first uranium mine in the Soviet Union had been established in Tajikistan in 1945, but the amounts produced were not enough for military production. It was only after uranium supplies from the German nuclear program had been seized, as well as taking advantage of mines in East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, and Poland, that sufficient resources were secured to proceed with the program. Design Bureau 11, commonly referred to as KB-11, was created on April 9, 1946 by the Council of Ministers. KB-11 was tasked to map out and work towards creating a nuclear weapon using the American approach and weapons-grade plutonium as the detonation trigger, instead of uranium, which was proving more difficult to work with. Work on this project was carried out quickly, and the first Soviet nuclear reactor came online in late October of 1946. Now, we should address one of the more debated topics in the history of the Cold War. I am, of course, talking about the role of espionage in the development of the Soviet nuclear program. There are many that argue that without the large spy network employed by the Soviet Union, that the USSR would never have been able to develop their own bomb. The Soviets had not only seized much knowledge from the German nuclear program, but had also infiltrated the Allies' nuclear programs, with such names as Klaus Fuchs, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, as well as members of the Cambridge Five, feeding information back to Soviet intelligence. For those who are interested, definitely stay tuned to the Cold War, as we will definitely be exploring those stories. So there's no controversy that the Soviets took advantage of Western intelligence, but I did say that it was a debated topic, didn't I? Where this debate rests is if the Soviets could have developed their own bomb independent of any borrowed American ideas. The Soviet physicist and scholar Yuri Khariton, who also happened to be a member of the Soviet nuclear program, admitted in later interviews that the information obtained from intelligence sources was very important. He also, however, insisted that the role played by Soviet scientists and researchers was still key. His argument was that since the Soviet program was already well underway, they were in a position to make sense of the intelligence they were receiving, and to then know what was feasible and what might be disinformation. Ultimately, the Soviet program was successful, and they test launched their first ballistic rocket in 1948, and on August 29, 1949, successfully detonated the RDS-1 device. Named First Lightning by the Soviets, it was nicknamed Joe 1 after its original sponsor, this man right here. The test site was in an area that became known as the Polygon, outside the town of Semipalatinsk in the Kazakh Soviet Socialist Republic. Okay, so now that both East and West had harnessed atomic weapons, both sides realized the terrible destructive power they both possessed and agreed to get rid of them forever, right? Right? Not so much. What both sides embarked on was a program of escalation, developing and building atomic weapons of greater and greater yield, capable of destroying huge swaths of the Earth with the push of a button. I'm going to jump ahead here in our timeline for a second to mention a theory that wouldn't be named until 1962 after the Cuban Missile Crisis, but whose seeds were planted in the story I just told. Mutually assured destruction, or MAD theory, is a security doctrine that preaches deterrence, or avoiding conflict based on the understanding that any attack made by one side using nuclear weapons would be met by an equally destructive response. MAD theory is basically the understanding that an atomic war, where both sides are armed with enough firepower to destroy the planet several times over, nobody wins, and therefore war is to be avoided. Now, as I said, this is jumping ahead a little from the late 1940s to the early 1960s. We still need to go through the 1950s, which saw unprecedented nuclear advancements of increasingly devastating magnitude, including the Tsar Bomba and the infamous Castle Bravo test. But as we get to those stories, I want you to keep in mind the idea that underpins mutually assured destruction, the total destruction of the planet, and how that can affect both political and social decision-making. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and so to avoid missing future episodes, please make sure you're subscribed to our channel and press the bell button. We can be reached via email at thecoldwarchannel@gmail.com or on Facebook at www.facebook.com/thecoldwartv. We rely on our patrons to create these videos, so consider supporting us.